It was late evening, the sky was quiet, and then suddenly, a pounding knock shook my door. When I looked out, I saw men in uniforms, badges flashing, voices barking orders. They claimed to be police, but something was off. Their words didn't match their eyes, their anger didn't match the law. And in that moment, standing face to face with strangers pretending to be cops, I realized this was no ordinary HOA visit. This was a trap. And what happened next changed everything. Welcome, my friends, to HOA Max Stories. My name is Robert. I'm a homeowner here in Texas, just an ordinary guy who worked his whole life to finally enjoy a quiet home. But the HOA? They never stopped knocking on my peace. On this channel, I share the true stories, the drama, and the battles homeowners like me face every day. So if you've ever had your door rattled by the HOA, or you simply enjoy a good fight for freedom at home, then pull up a chair. And before we dive in, I'd love for you to subscribe. Think of it like joining me on the porch for a cup of coffee. It doesn't cost a thing, but it means the world. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know if you're from Texas like me, or maybe from somewhere far across the country. I had barely finished my coffee that evening when I heard it. That hard, violent knock on my front door. It wasn't just a neighbor's knock, it wasn't the friendly tap of a delivery guy. It was loud, angry, almost like they were trying to break their way in. The sound echoed through the hallway and rattled my chest. I froze for a second. Then another knock followed. Even louder. Boom. 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 I took a deep breath and peeked through the side window by the door. That's when I saw them. 4 men, standing shoulder to shoulder. Uniforms on. Badges shining. Guns on their hips. At first glance, you'd think they were real cops. But here's the thing. I've lived long enough to know what real officers look like. And something was off. The way they stood, the way they glanced around nervously. The patches on their shirts looked cheap, like they were printed yesterday. And their badges? Too shiny, like toys from a store. My heart started racing. I whispered to myself, "This doesn't feel right." One of them stepped closer to the door and shouted, "Open up! HOA police!" I almost laughed out loud. HOA police? What in the world was that? I've dealt with HOAs before. I know they can send letters. I know they can fine you. But since when did HOAs have their own police force? The man's voice was stern. "We need to speak to you. You've broken HOA rules. Open the door now." Broken rules? I asked myself, what rules? I keep my lawn trimmed, my porch clean, and my trash bins where they belong. This didn't make any sense. I cracked the door just a little. Just enough so they could hear me. "Who are you?" I asked. The man at the front flashed his badge quickly and pulled it back before I could read it. "HOA Enforcement Division," he said. My stomach turned. HOA Enforcement Division? Never heard of it. "Sir," I said slowly, "I don't know who you are. If you're real cops, show me your ID cards. Show me your department." The man smirked. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You're already in violation." The other 3 men stood behind him, shifting uncomfortably. One had his hand resting on what looked like a gun holster. Another tapped his boot impatiently on my porch. The third, he just stared at me, unblinking, like he was waiting for me to crack under pressure. My hands were shaking, but I didn't let them see. I gripped the door tight and steadied my voice. "You're not police," I said. "Real police don't hide their badges. Real police don't refuse to answer questions." The man's face hardened. "You open this door right now, or we'll come back with bigger problems for you." That was the moment I realized exactly what was happening. This wasn't about HOA rules. This wasn't about broken bylaws. This was about intimidation. Fear. They wanted me scared enough to obey without asking questions. But here's the thing. I've lived long enough to know that fear only works if you give it power. And I wasn't about to hand them that power. I took a step closer to the door, looked them dead in the eyes, and said, "Get lost, or get arrested." For the first time, they hesitated. The man in front blinked. The one on the left shifted his feet. Even the one tapping his boots suddenly stopped. They weren't expecting that. They were expecting me to beg, to fold, to be afraid. But instead, I stood tall. The leader finally barked back. "You think you can threaten us?" I smiled. "If you're real cops, call your station. If you're not, the sheriff's car will be here in 2 minutes anyway." That was half bluff, half truth. I had already dialed the sheriff's office the moment I heard the first knock. And I knew, any second now, backup would arrive. The men glanced at each other. Their confidence cracked. One of them whispered something to the leader. Another took a nervous step backward. And me? I just stood there, waiting, daring them to make the next move. The night air grew heavy. The porch light above us flickered like it was part of the show. And for a brief second, time itself seemed to freeze. Then, headlights turned the corner. Bright blue and red flashing lights lit up the street. A real sheriff's car pulled up slowly, tires crunching on the road. The fake cops stiffened. Their faces drained of color. And I knew, the game was over. But here's the funny part, my friends. I had only just begun to fight. And now I'll ask you this, my friends. If 4 strangers dressed as fake cops showed up at your door, claiming they were from the HOA, would you open that door? Or would you slam it shut? Tell me in the comments below, because I really want to know how you would handle it. The flashing lights cut through the night like a blade. Red, blue, the glow washed over the street, bouncing off the houses, painting my front yard in color. The sheriff's cruiser rolled to a slow stop right in front of my porch. The fake cops froze. Their fake confidence cracked like glass. One of them whispered, "It's the sheriff." I stood a little taller, my hand still on the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, the moment of truth had arrived. The real sheriff stepped out of the car. Heavy boots touched the pavement. A tall man in a brown uniform with the county patch stitched perfectly on his shoulder. His badge gleamed under the porch light. His belt carried the real tools of law, radio, cuffs, firearm, the things real officers carry. And most importantly, his presence carried authority. The kind of authority these fake men could never fake. He shut the car door slowly, almost like he wanted the sound to echo across the street. Then he walked forward, calm, steady, each step deliberate. The fake cops shuffled nervously. One of them adjusted his fake badge, another tugged at his shirt collar like it suddenly didn't fit. The leader? He clenched his jaw, but I could see the panic growing in his eyes. The sheriff stopped at the bottom of my porch steps and said in a calm, firm voice, "Evening, folks. Can someone explain what's going on here?" I didn't say a word at first. I wanted them to speak. I wanted to see what kind of story they'd spin in front of a real badge. The leader of the fake cops cleared his throat. Officer, we're here on HOA business. This man has been violating community rules, and we're here to enforce them." The sheriff raised one eyebrow. "HOA business," he repeated. The leader nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. We're the HOA enforcement unit. The sheriff held up his hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Let me make something clear," the sheriff said, his voice colder now. "There is no such thing as an HOA enforcement unit with police powers. So I'm going to ask again, who exactly are you?" The men froze. They looked at each other, their faces pale. None of them spoke. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "IDs. Now." One by one, the men shifted uncomfortably. The leader reached into his pocket, fumbling, and pulled out a wallet. He held up an ID, but the sheriff snatched it and studied it under the porch light. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "This is fake," he said flatly. He turned to the others. "You three, show me yours." The second man shook his head. I left mine at home." The third man muttered, "I don't have one." The fourth just stared at the ground, silent. The sheriff stepped up onto the porch now, his boots heavy on the wood. He looked them dead in the eyes. "You boys better start talking. Because right now, this looks like impersonating law enforcement. And that's a felony." The leader's tough mask cracked completely. He stammered, we were just told to come here. The HOA president, he said we needed to make an example. He told us to scare the homeowner." My stomach turned. There it was. The truth. The HOA was behind this little stunt. The sheriff crossed his arms. Scare him? By dressing up as cops? Carrying fake badges and fake guns? You know what kind of crime you're committing? The men lowered their heads, like schoolboys caught cheating on a test. I finally spoke up, my voice strong now. "Sheriff, they came to my door, threatened me, told me I'd be arrested if I didn't obey HOA rules. They pounded on my door, scared me in my own home." The sheriff turned back to me, his eyes softening. "You did the right thing by calling," he said. Then his voice hardened again as he faced the men. "You should be ashamed of yourselves." The leader tried one last weak defense. "We were just following orders." The sheriff stepped closer, his voice cutting like steel. "That excuse doesn't work. Not here. Not tonight." The silence that followed was heavy. The only sound was the sheriff's radio crackling softly at his belt. Finally, the sheriff said, "Here's what's going to happen. You're leaving this property right now. If I see you again pulling this stunt, you'll be in the back of my cruiser headed to jail. Understood?" The men nodded quickly, almost tripping over themselves to agree. They turned and started walking off the porch, their fake uniforms sagging, their fake courage gone. As they reached the street, one of them muttered, "This isn't over." I stepped forward and shouted back, "Oh, it's over. And next time, bring the real cops." The sheriff gave me a half smile. "You've got guts," he said quietly. "But be careful. People like that, when they get desperate, they can get dangerous." I nodded. I knew he was right. This wasn't just about fake cops. This was about the HOA's thirst for control, their obsession with power, and how far they'd go to break a homeowner's spirit. The sheriff stayed a few more minutes, took down a short report, and promised he'd follow up. Then he tipped his hat, got back in his cruiser, and drove off into the night. The porch felt quiet again. But inside me, a storm was brewing. Because if the HOA thought they could intimidate me with fake cops, they had no idea what kind of fight they had just started. I closed the door slowly, locked it, and leaned against it for a moment, breathing heavy. Relief mixed with anger. Fear mixed with determination. And one thought kept circling in my head. How far would the HOA really go next time? Now let me ask you, friends. If your HOA sent fake cops to your door, and then you learned the HOA president himself was behind it all, what would you do first? Call a lawyer, or confront the HOA directly? Tell me in the comments, because I'm curious which fight you'd pick. The silence inside my home felt heavier than the knocking had ever been. I leaned against the door, listening to the echo of those fake boots fading down the street, my heart still racing. But even as the night grew quiet, my mind refused to rest. The sheriff's words replayed in my head. Be careful, desperate people can get dangerous. And he was right. Because I knew exactly who was behind this. The HOA president. I walked into my living room, switched on the lamp, and sat down. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. Every second felt like a hammer on my nerves. I asked myself, how far would they go next time? Fake cops tonight. What tomorrow? I poured myself a glass of water, but even that simple act felt shaky. My hand trembled as the glass touched the counter. I had lived in this neighborhood for years. I had paid my dues. I had followed every rule. And yet here I was, being targeted like a criminal in my own home. I thought about all the letters I'd received from the HOA over the years. The friendly reminders, the warnings, the threats of fines. They always carried the same tone: power, control. And the president? He thrived on it. A man who loved being in charge. A man who enjoyed making homeowners feel small. Now he had gone too far. Sending men to my door in fake uniforms? That wasn't just intimidation. That was a crime. I knew then that I couldn't stay silent. If I let this go, it would only get worse. So I made a decision. The very next morning, I was going to the HOA office. Face to face. No hiding behind letters. No hiding behind fake badges. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house made me jump. Every shadow outside my window looked suspicious. But as the sun rose, so did my determination. By 9 a.m., I was pulling into the HOA parking lot. It was a simple building, beige bricks, a flagpole out front, the letters Homeowners Association etched on a cheap sign. But to me, it looked like the fortress of a tyrant. I walked inside, my footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. Behind the desk sat a woman with glasses, typing lazily on her computer. She looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I need to speak to the president." Her expression shifted slightly. A flicker of unease. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I replied, my voice sharp. "But after what happened last night, he's going to want to see me." She hesitated, then picked up the phone. She whispered something, her eyes flicking nervously toward me, then nodded. "You can go in," she said quietly. "Down the hall, last door on the right." I walked down that hallway like a soldier marching to battle. My hands were steady now. My fear had burned away overnight, replaced with fire. When I pushed the door open, there he was. The president of the HOA. A man in his late 50s, slick back hair, expensive suit, smug smile. He sat behind a large oak desk like a king on his throne. Well, he said, leaning back in his chair. "If it isn't my most troublesome homeowner." I clenched my fists. "Cut the games," I said. "You know exactly why I'm here." He raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" "You sent men to my house last night," I snapped. "Men dressed as cops. Men who threatened me. Men who pretended they had the law on their side." His smile widened, but his eyes gave him away. A flicker of guilt. A flash of recognition. Then he chuckled. "Oh, you mean my enforcement team?" "Enforcement team?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean those criminals you sent to impersonate law enforcement?" He shrugged, like it was no big deal. "They were just there to remind you of the rules. Sometimes words aren't enough. Sometimes people need a little push." My blood boiled. A little push? They threatened to arrest me. They pounded on my door like they owned the place. He leaned forward now, his voice low and cold. "Because we do own the place. You live under our rules. You signed the papers when you moved in. You agreed to obey. And when you don't, we remind you who's in charge." I stared at him, disgusted. This isn't a neighborhood anymore. It's a dictatorship. He smirked. "Call it whatever you want. But the fact is, we control what happens here. And if you keep fighting us, you'll regret it." For a moment, the room was silent. Only the hum of the fluorescent light above us filled the air. Then I spoke, my voice calm but sharp as a knife. "You think you scared me last night. But you didn't. You crossed a line. And now, it's you who should be afraid." His smile faltered just slightly. I turned, opened the door, and walked out without waiting for a reply. As I stepped back into the daylight, I felt the weight of what had just happened. The HOA president had admitted it, practically confessed. And I knew this was far from over. Because if he was bold enough to send fake cops once, he'd do worse the next time. The only question now was, how far would he really go? And that's what I want to ask you, my friends. If you were in my shoes, standing face to face with an HOA president who openly threatened you, would you fight him head-on, or would you start building your case in silence? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would battle a man drunk on power. The sunlight hit my face as I stepped out of that office. But instead of feeling free, I felt heavier than ever. I had looked into the eyes of the HOA president. And for the first time, I realized just how far his thirst for control had gone. His words kept replaying in my head. We own the place. You signed the papers. You'll regret it. I walked to my truck, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was a storm: anger, fear, defiance all clashing together. On the drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every car behind me felt like a tail. Every shadow on the street corner felt like eyes. And when I finally pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. My trash bins. They weren't where I had left them. They were dragged halfway up the street, tipped over, garbage scattered across the sidewalk like someone wanted the whole neighborhood to see. My first thought? Kids. Maybe just kids messing around. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't random. This was a message. I cleaned it up slowly, my eyes scanning the street. And that's when I saw them. Two men, sitting in a black SUV parked just down the road. Dark tinted windows, engine running, no one else around. They weren't neighbors. And they weren't hiding the fact that they were watching me. My stomach sank. The HOA president hadn't wasted a single day. He had people watching me already. I went inside, shut my blinds, and sat in the dark for a while. It felt like my own home had turned into a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every sound outside made my chest tighten. But the more I sat there, the clearer it became. If I let fear run me now, they'd win. So I decided to test them. I grabbed my phone, walked out on the porch, and started recording. I pointed the camera straight at the SUV. The moment they noticed, the driver shifted into gear. The engine roared, and they sped off down the street like rats scattering when the lights come on. I smiled to myself. At least I knew one thing. They didn't want to be exposed. Still, it was proof. Proof that they were escalating. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard voices outside again. This time it wasn't pounding on my door. It was whispers. Low, angry whispers drifting through my window. I walked quietly to the curtain and pulled it back just a hair. And there they were, two men standing in my yard, shining flashlights at my grass, pointing at my fence, scribbling on notepads. I pushed open the door and shouted, "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" They jumped. One of them cleared his throat and said, "We're with the HOA inspection team. Just doing our job." Inspection team? At night? I laughed bitterly. Funny time for an inspection, don't you think? They didn't answer. They just turned and walked quickly down the street, disappearing into the dark. I stood on my porch, heart pounding again. They weren't even trying to follow their own rules anymore. They weren't looking for violations, they were creating fear. That night I barely slept again. I sat in my living room with the lights off, staring at the door, listening for every sound. I thought about calling the sheriff again, but I also knew, without solid proof, it would just be my word against theirs. I needed more. I needed undeniable evidence. So the next day, I drove to the hardware store and bought cameras. Front porch, backyard, driveway, every angle covered. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, I was going to catch them in the act. As I was mounting the last one, a neighbor walked by. An older man, gray hair, slow step. He paused and said softly, You too, huh? I turned to him. What do you mean? He looked around nervously before leaning in. They came after me last year. Said I painted my shutters the wrong color. Sent guys to my house late at night. Scared my wife half to death. I didn't fight them. I just paid the fines. But they don't stop. Once they know you're weak, they never stop. His eyes were full of regret. They're worse than you think, he whispered, then shuffled away. I stood there frozen, the drill still in my hand. If they had done this to him, how many others had they terrorized? How many neighbors had already given up, too scared to fight back? And more importantly, how many would stand with me if I chose to fight? The cameras gave me some comfort, but deep down I knew the battle had only just begun. The HOA president wasn't bluffing when he said I'd regret crossing him. The fake cops, the SUV, the midnight inspectors, it was all building up to something bigger. And I couldn't help but wonder. What would be their next move? And now, friends, I want to hear from you. If your HOA started spying on you, moving your trash, sending people at night to inspect your home, would you fight back with cameras like I did, or would you pack up and leave the neighborhood for good? Tell me in the comments, because I really want to know how you would handle this kind of harassment. The first night after installing the cameras, I sat in the dark living room with my laptop open, streaming the footage live. The quiet hum of the machines was the only sound. Every creak of the house felt louder, every passing car's headlights flickered across the blinds like warning signs. Midnight came, then 1 a.m., then 2. I almost drifted to sleep when suddenly, movement. The screen lit up with figures. 2 shadows creeping along the side of my house. They crouched low, moving carefully, as if they believed they were invisible. But they weren't invisible anymore. Every step they took was caught crystal clear in black and white. I leaned closer, heart pounding, watching as they examined my fence, tapped on my windows, even pulled at my mailbox like they were checking for something inside. One of them whispered something I couldn't hear, then pointed toward my backyard. I grabbed my phone, already dialing the sheriff, when the figures suddenly froze. Because they noticed the small red light blinking on the camera. They looked at each other, panicked, and sprinted into the darkness. For the first time in days, I smiled. I had them now. Proof. The next morning, I downloaded the footage, saved it on 3 different drives, and printed screenshots. I wasn't going to let the HOA twist this. Not this time. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk down the street, to breathe some fresh air and clear my head. But as I walked, I noticed something strange. Neighbors staring. Curtains shifting. People whispering. At first, I thought maybe they were just curious about the cameras I had put up. But then, halfway down the block, I saw it. A flyer. Stapled to the community board near the mailbox stand. My name printed in bold. It read, "This homeowner is in violation of HOA rules. He refuses to comply, refuses to respect the community, and is under investigation. Do not support him." My stomach dropped. They weren't just harassing me at night anymore. They were turning the entire neighborhood against me. I ripped the flyer down, but as I walked back to my house, I noticed more. On light poles. On fences. Even slipped into a neighbor's mailbox. Dozens of them. By the time I reached my driveway, anger had drowned out fear. This wasn't just intimidation. This was public shaming. And it worked. Because later that evening, as I watered my lawn, one of my neighbors, a woman I had waved to for years, crossed the street and shouted, "Why don't you just follow the rules like the rest of us? You're making life harder for everyone." I set the hose down, water dripping onto the grass. "Do you know what they've done to me?" I asked. She crossed her arms. "All I know is, the HOA says you're dangerous. And I don't want trouble near my kids." Her words cut deeper than the flyers. Dangerous? That's what they were calling me now? I realized then that this wasn't just my fight anymore. This was bigger. The HOA wasn't just trying to control me. They were trying to control the entire community by making an example out of me. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the evidence on my laptop, the videos of men sneaking around, the flyers in my hand, the memory of that neighbor's accusing eyes. And a thought hit me like lightning. If they could lie about me so easily, how many lies had they already told about others? The older man I spoke to while installing the cameras, how many lies had he swallowed before giving up? How many of my neighbors lived in quiet fear, paying fines they didn't know, changing shutters they didn't need to, cutting trees they didn't want to cut just to avoid becoming the next target? The HOA president was smart. He ruled with fear. He didn't need an army, he just needed everyone too scared to resist. But me? I wasn't scared anymore. The next morning, I printed out every screenshot, every flyer, and burned the footage onto a DVD. Then I called a lawyer. When I explained everything, the lawyer's tone shifted from polite to serious. This is harassment. This is intimidation. And if they're impersonating police? That's criminal. Hearing those words out loud gave me strength. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. But before the legal wheels could even start turning, the HOA struck again. And this time, it was in broad daylight. I was mowing my lawn, headphones in, sweat dripping under the sun, when I saw a group gathering at the end of my driveway. 5 men. 3 women. And at the center, the HOA president. He had that smug grin again, arms folded, as if the street itself belonged to him. One of the women held up her phone, recording me. I shut off the mower and walked toward them. "What do you want now?" I asked. The president smirked. "We're documenting your violations. The whole community needs to see what kind of neighbor you really are." He gestured toward my freshly cut lawn. "Too long last week. Against the rules." I laughed in disbelief. "You're kidding, right?" But he didn't laugh. Neither did the people beside him. They all stared at me like I was some criminal on trial. For the first time, I realized the president wasn't just using fake cops or midnight visits anymore. He was building a mob. A crowd of fearful neighbors who believed his lies. Turning my own street into a stage, and me into the villain. My fists clenched. I could feel my heart pounding again, the same way it had that first night at the door. But I wasn't about to let him win in front of everyone. I stepped closer, locked eyes with him, and said loud enough for every phone camera to hear. "You can lie about me. You can stalk me. You can post flyers on every wall in this neighborhood. But I'm not afraid of you. And one day, the truth will catch up with you." The smile faltered on his face. For just a second. And I knew I had struck a nerve. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling through them. The woman with the phone lowered it slowly. And I realized something. Fear might control people. But courage? Courage could break that spell. And now I'll ask you, my friends. If your HOA president dragged a crowd to your driveway, recording you, shaming you in front of your neighbors, would you shout back like I did, or would you stay silent and let the mob pass? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would face a crowd built on lies. The crowd slowly drifted away from my driveway that day, but the look on their faces burned into me. Some looked angry. Some looked confused. And a few, just a few, looked like they were starting to doubt the president's words. But I knew one thing for sure. The war had left the shadows. It wasn't whispers or flyers anymore. It was out in the open. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the lights dimmed low. Papers spread across the wood, screenshots, flyers, the DVD with video footage, all the proof I had collected. Beside it, a thick folder my lawyer had given me. Inside were copies of state laws, statutes, cases where HOAs had crossed the line. I studied them like a soldier reading a battle map. Every page was another weapon. Every line of legal code, another shield. The more I read, the angrier I became. Because the truth was right there in black and white. The HOA didn't have the power they pretended to have. They thrived on fear, not law. I made my decision. No more waiting. No more just defending myself. I was going on the offensive. The next morning, I walked into the county courthouse with my lawyer by my side. We filed complaints for harassment, defamation, and impersonation of law enforcement. The clerk stamped the papers, the sound echoing like a gunshot. It felt like the first real step toward justice. But justice doesn't come easy. Because the moment the HOA president found out, he doubled down. That same evening, I came home to find a bright red notice taped to my front door. Immediate fine, $500 for failure to comply with HOA bylaws. No explanation. No detail. Just a fine. I ripped it off, crumpled it in my fist, and threw it into the trash. But when I checked my mailbox, there were more. Letters from the HOA piling up, each one more threatening than the last. It was like they were trying to bury me in paper. I laughed bitterly. They thought fines would scare me after everything they'd already done? Not anymore. I grabbed the latest letter, walked into my office, and placed it on top of the growing stack of evidence. Every letter they sent me was another nail in their own coffin. But the harassment didn't stop there. 2 days later, as I was leaving for work, I found my tires slashed. All 4 of them. The car sat low, useless, crippled on the driveway. I stood there in the morning sun, the rubber shredded, the steel wires poking out like bones. And I knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't kids. This was the HOA. My blood boiled. I picked up my phone and called the sheriff again. This time, he sent a deputy who walked around the car, shook his head, and said, "Looks like someone wanted to send you a message." I pointed at my cameras. "Check the footage. You'll see exactly who it was." We pulled the video together, and sure enough, 2 men, hoods pulled up, sneaking across my driveway at 3 a.m. One knelt by the tires, the other stood watch. When they were done, they sprinted off into the night. The deputy whistled low. "This is serious," he said. "We'll add it to the case file." Hearing those words gave me strength again. Because now, I wasn't just fighting back in theory. Now I had law enforcement and legal paperwork on my side. The HOA's game was crumbling. Still, the president wasn't done trying. The very next weekend, the HOA held a special meeting. They invited the whole community, printed flyers, even promised free food to lure people in. The topic? Me. I walked into that meeting hall alone, all eyes turning toward me. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some people glared. Others just stared. At the front of the room stood the president, microphone in hand, a smug smile plastered across his face. He pointed at me and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the man threatening the harmony of our community. This is the man dragging our neighborhood into chaos." The crowd murmured. He continued, his voice loud and dramatic. "He refuses to follow the rules. He harasses the board. He calls the police on his own neighbors. And now, he's suing us with taxpayer resources. This man is dangerous. This man must be stopped." The words hit me like stones. But I didn't flinch. I stood tall, waiting for my turn. When the president finally paused for breath, I walked forward and asked for the mic. At first, he refused. But the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. "Let him speak," someone said. "Yeah, give him a chance," another added. Finally, with a sour look, he handed it to me. I took a deep breath, looked out at the faces in the room, faces of people I had waved to for years, people I had shared barbecues and block parties with. And I spoke from the heart. "Neighbors, I've lived here just like you. I've followed the rules, paid my dues, and cared for my home. But lately, the HOA has crossed a line. They've sent men to my door pretending to be cops. They've left threats on my property. They've slashed my tires. And now they're trying to turn all of you against me with lies. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The president shouted, "Lies. All lies." But I held up my phone. "Do you want proof?" I asked. I pressed play. On the screen, video footage from my cameras lit up. The men sneaking around my house. The hoods. The slashing of the tires. The room went silent. Dead silent. I let the silence hang before I spoke again. This isn't about me. This is about power. If they can do this to me, they can do it to any one of you. Today it's my door. Tomorrow, it could be yours. For the first time, I saw doubt in their eyes. Neighbors shifting, whispering to each other, frowning at the president. The president's face flushed red. He grabbed the mic back and shouted, "Don't believe him. He's twisting everything. He's the problem." But it was too late. The seed of truth had been planted. I walked out of that meeting with my head high. And though I was still alone in that moment, I knew change was coming. Because fear can silence people. But once they see the truth, fear begins to crack. And now, friends, let me ask you. If you were standing in that hall, surrounded by your neighbors, and the HOA president called you dangerous, would you stay quiet to keep the peace, or would you show your evidence in front of everyone like I did? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would handle being put on trial in your own community. The night after that meeting, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear this time, but because for the first time in weeks, I felt hope. I had seen it in their faces. My neighbors weren't so sure anymore. The president's lies were cracking. The truth was slipping through. But I also knew something else. A man like him wouldn't go down quietly. The following morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps on my porch. I rushed to the door and saw another notice taped to it. But this one was different. It wasn't a fine. It was an eviction notice. The HOA president had decided to play his boldest card. He claimed I was such a threat to community harmony that I no longer had the right to live in my own home. I laughed when I read it, but my hands were shaking. Because as ridiculous as it was, I knew some neighbors might believe it. And that was his strategy: confuse, scare, intimidate. I took the notice straight to my lawyer. When he read it, he smirked and shook his head. "He's gone too far," he said. "This isn't just harassment anymore. This is fraud. This is abuse of power. And now, we have enough to bury him in court." Those words were the fuel I needed. Because at that moment, I realized the fight wasn't just mine anymore. It was every homeowner's fight. The trial came faster than I expected. The courthouse was packed that morning: neighbors, board members, even reporters who had caught wind of the story. The air buzzed with tension. On one side sat me and my lawyer, stacks of evidence laid out in neat piles. On the other side, the HOA president and his legal team, smug and confident, whispering like they'd already won. When the judge walked in, the room fell silent. The gavel hit the desk, sharp and heavy. Court is in session. The HOA president's lawyer went first. He painted me as a reckless homeowner, a man who refused to follow rules, a man who endangered the peace of the neighborhood. He waved documents, waved fines, waved papers that made me look like the villain. Some people in the crowd nodded. I clenched my fists. The lies felt like daggers. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood tall, calm, steady. "Your Honor," he began, "this isn't about one man breaking rules. This is about an HOA president who abused his power to silence and intimidate." He laid the flyers on the table. He showed the fake police badges. He played the video of men sneaking around my yard. And finally, he showed the footage of my tires being slashed. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The HOA president shifted uncomfortably, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. And for the first time, I saw fear in him. Then came the part that changed everything. My lawyer called witnesses. Neighbors. The older man I had spoken to while installing cameras stepped forward. His voice trembled as he said, "They did the same to me. Threats, letters, late-night visits. I paid because I was scared. But he was brave enough to fight." One by one, others began to speak. Stories of intimidation. Stories of fear. Stories that painted the president not as a leader, but as a bully. By the time the last witness spoke, the president's smug grin was gone. His face was pale, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. The judge finally turned to him and said, "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" The president stammered, his voice shaking. They misunderstood. I was only protecting the community." The judge slammed the gavel. "Enough. What you did was illegal. You impersonated law enforcement. You harassed homeowners. You abused your position. And you endangered the very people you were supposed to serve." The room erupted. Some gasped. Some whispered. And me? I just sat there, silent, as the weight of months of fear and anger lifted off my shoulders. The judge's decision was swift. The president was removed from his position. The HOA was fined heavily. And as for me, I was cleared of every so-called violation. When I walked out of that courthouse, the sunlight felt different. Warmer. Lighter. Neighbors who once avoided my eyes now walked up to shake my hand. "Thank you," they said, "for standing up when we couldn't." I smiled, but deep inside, I knew this wasn't just about winning a case. It was about something bigger. Because what happened to me could happen to anyone. And the only reason the HOA got away with it for so long was because people were too afraid to fight back. That night, I sat on my porch, the quiet finally peaceful again. The air was cool, the stars clear above. And I thought to myself, sometimes the scariest battles aren't fought with guns or fists, but with courage, truth, and the refusal to be silent. And as I leaned back in my chair, one thought crossed my mind. The HOA wanted me gone. But instead, they woke up something stronger in me. Something they could never control. And now, friends, I'll leave you with this question. If your HOA president was dragged into court and finally exposed for all his lies and abuse, would you forgive him once justice was served, or would you make sure he never had power again? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know if you believe in second chances, or if some people should never be trusted again.